There's a dungeon boss in the new WoW dungeon next season called Big Mama.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my god. I once again cannot see a thing, but I have my super.
He's blinded.
Yes, he is. There's a barrier. Never mind. Zone. Some people just want to watch the world burn. It's me. I'm people. And wow, is it fun to just light everything on fire. Today's build will have so many explosions, it'll make Michael Bay blush. Recently, Bungie finally fixed a major problem with ignitions not working properly, and they were severely negatively impacted to the point where it wasn't even worth using them. Since then, they have fixed the issue and also brought a new sandbox patch where roaming supers got buffed to charge 3 times faster in PvE content. In short, ignition builds were back on the table, so let's get to making things explode again. For starters, the combo we'll be focused on today will be Dawnblade Warlock, rocking the Dawn Chorus exotic helmet and using Dragon's Breath as our main source of scorching and igniting everything to juice up our super in quick fashion, letting us go straight into Dawnblade. For those of you that are new to the game, Dawn Chorus states your Daybreak, which is your super, projectiles deal more damage and scorch targets on impact. Your scorch is improved, and you gain a small amount of melee energy when your scorch damages a target. As for Dragon's Breath, the intrinsic trait states rockets embed themselves in struck targets and periodically eject incendiary fuel that inflicts scorch. The longer the weapon goes without firing, the more fuel the next rocket contains. And then its perk on the weapon itself is High Octane, which states igniting nearby targets partially replenishes fuel. This weapon refills itself from reserves upon gaining maximum fuel. So it has its own built-in auto-loading holster, if you will. Now let's go over the kit. So obviously our super is going to be Dawnblade. As for our abilities, the first one we have up is Phoenix Dive. This is essentially just a more versatile rift. It heals you a little bit, although not continuously like a healing rift would. The good part about this, at least for me, is I'm going to be constantly in the air at certain points during fights with big mobs, so I can activate this while I'm in the air, dive down back to the floor, and heal myself, and then just reset myself that way. So I think Phoenix Dive is just the better option than a regular Rift. For our melee, I think both melees work for this build. I think Celestial Fire is better in content where there's tons of enemies and yellow bars around you. That way you don't have to actually be close to activate your melee. The Scorch stuff, if you're doing content where most of the ads are just like red bars and not, you know, Champions, Lucent Hive, Tormentors, etc., then I would actually go with Incinerator Snap for just free ignitions on top of everything else igniting the enemies. For your grenade, you can go with whatever you like. Personally, I have Healing Rift to just have a backup emergency heal if I happen to need it in high-end content. If you're doing like mid-content, let's say like regular Vanguard Op Strikes, you could do whatever grenade you want. You could do Solar, Fusion, etc., whatever. For the aspects, I have Touch of Flame and Helion on. Helion in particular is great for helping you with ignitions and also a good combo from your Phoenix Knife. You dive down, you heal yourself a little bit, and then Helion activates to try to ignite things for you. Now, as for Touch of Flame, I'm not going to lie to you. I have been debating taking this out for Icarus Dash because not having Icarus Dash on a Solar Warlock just feels like it's like you're naked almost. You know, I don't know, maybe I have a chronic addiction to Eager Edge and Icarus Dash skating on Warlock all these years, but I have been highly debating putting on Icarus instead of Touch of Flame. I will leave that up to you guys. Moving on to fragments, we have 4 of them going from left to right. First is Ember of Eruption. Your solar ignitions have increased area of effect. Pretty straightforward. Number 2 is Ember of Ashes. You apply more Scorch stacks to targets. This is great with Dragon's Breath. Number 3 is Ember of Char. Your solar ignitions spread Scorch to affected targets. So you put Dragon's Breath on the ground. Let's say there's a bunch of orange bars or yellow bars. One of them starts igniting, dies, spreads the Scorch to other targets, then they explode, and so on. Really helpful. And lastly, we have Ember of Singeing. Your class ability recharges faster when you scorch targets. So this is basically so you can spam Helion with Phoenix Dive for healing and more ignitions that way. Now, some people might say, well, what about torches? That's a pretty common fragment to have for Warlocks or any solar build for that matter. The thing with torches is obviously being radiant and doing more weapon damage is great, but for this build, what I'm using doesn't really need bonus weapon damage. For example, with Dragon's Breath, most of its damage is coming from the ignitions that it causes. The weapon itself doesn't really do that much damage. It's the same reason why I'm not going to be running you know, 3 Solar Surge on my boots that I'll show later on in the video. Same thing with my kinetic weapon. Spoiler, it's going to be Lost Signal, which again doesn't really do any damage. It's just there to weaken enemies and maybe auto-reload my Dragon's Breath if I don't have it popping off on its own. But I will say, if you're doing content where you're going to run into, let's say, a bunch of barrier champions and you don't want to put a barrier weapon on because shotguns and scouts suck for barrier, then you can probably replace like Eruption for torches instead. Speaking of weapons, let's talk about the third weapon since I spoiled the other two. In my energy slot, I have BXR Battler on for a couple of reasons. Number one, it can stun unstoppable champions if I need it to. Number two, it has Incandescent on, so it goes well with the build. And number three, and probably more importantly, it's the Halo BR, and I'm a Halo guy, so why the hell would I not use it in this build? On a more serious note, I do have the Heavy Ammo Finder Enhancement mod on the BXR, so if I happen to be running out of heavy ammo for my Dragon's Breath, I can use this to get some kills, get some scorches off, maybe an ignition, and also make myself heavy ammo. There's one more thing I want to point out before we get to all the mods in a second here. This build in particular actually becomes better the higher you climb in the content ladder in terms of difficulty. If you're finding mid-level enemies that die very quickly, you won't really get a ton of super energy out of your build because they already die before all your ignitions pop off. When you're playing against higher end content enemies where you can actually hit Dragon's Breath on the ground and they start taking damage and scorch over time, that's when your ignitions start building a ton of super energy for you. So if you're playing low level content and you're like, why am I not getting super energy? That's why. When you go into higher content, you will notice that your super bar will start climbing much faster. For artifact mods, you don't really need anything, but there are some helpful mods to put on, like Overload Grenade Launcher for stunning Overlord champions since you're using Lost Signal, if you're using my weapons anyway. You have Concussive Reload, of course, where you put your Lost Signal on an enemy, you weaken them, and also if you have the Tonic on, you will reload your other weapons, should you need it. Curative Orbs is also really nice for cracking shields to get bonus super energy with Orbs of Power. And then lastly, Power from Pain. If you happen to get rapid final blows against weakened targets from your Lost Signal, then you can grant yourself Devour, which is always nice to have. And now for our armor mods. Let's start with the helmet. We have one copy of Dynamo to reduce super cooldown when using your class ability in your targets. In this case, it's Phoenix Dive. We have one copy of Font of Wisdom, which, if you didn't know, gives you plus 30 to your intellect stat when you hold an armor charge, which is extremely underrated to getting your super back that much faster. And then we have one copy of Solar Siphon for when we're using our Dragon's Breath and BXR. For our gloves, we have two copies of Focusing Strike, grant class ability energy when you cause damage with a powered melee attack, Celestial Fire or Incinerator Snap in this case. And then we have one copy of Impact Induction, causing damage with a powered melee attack, reduces your grenade cooldown to get back to your healing nade faster. Chest, nothing crazy here. We have Arc Resist, Void Resist, and then one copy of Solar Reserves just to get more ammo out, but if you need it, you could put Solar Resist here instead for higher end content. In our boots, we have one copy of Insulation, reduce class ability cooldown each time you pick up an Aura of Power, one copy of Recuperation to replenish health each time you pick up an Aura of Power, and Absolution reduces your ability cooldowns each time you pick up an Aura of Power. And lastly, the class item. I have the correct one on now. First is going to be Outrage, reduce your melee cooldown when you're using your class ability, so you Phoenix Dive to reduce your melee cooldown. Next is Reaper. After you use your class ability and then you use your weapons to kill something, it'll spawn an Aura of Power. And then lastly, Powerful Attraction. This is specifically for when you Phoenix Dive near enemies where you've made a bunch of orbs and you don't have to actually run around to get the orbs. In particular, you don't want to run into the spot where you Dragon Breath the ground, because then you will, die. So in this case, Powerful Attraction, just yoink the orbs from a distance safely. And that's pretty much the build. I will leave a dim link down in the description below as always. In the meantime, let me know what you think of the build, and stay tuned for more builds including Titan and Hunters as well. That said, if you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a like and or comment below as well. If you don't know what to leave as a comment, you can leave Dawnblade as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.